A very good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Sid, and I work as an IT security specialist for Manage Engine, and I'm going to be your host and presenter for today's session. So thank you so much for taking time off from your busy schedules for joining us today for our webinar on ransomware. But before we get started, I just want to make sure that there's no issue with the webinar console. I just hope that you can hear my voice. I'm audible and that you have no issues with viewing my shared screen as well. Right. So in case you have any difficulties, you can reach out to us on the live chat on the GoToWebinar panel at any point over the course of the webinar. And while we're at it, I'll also get another routine housekeeping thing out of the way, which is that we'll be sending you the recording of today's session within a day or two. So it'll be easy for you in case you'd like to share the session with one of your colleagues. You can easily do that, right? So we'll send you the YouTube link for today's session as well. Right, so I hope there's no issues with the webinar setup, and if so, we can get started with today's session. I also just want to let you know that we're available on the live chat throughout the webinar, so you can actually ask us questions about the webinar itself. So I'm actually joined by Ram Ganesh and Bruce, who are from our technical support and pre-sales teams respectively, and they are here to answer any questions that you may have over the course of the session. Right, so we want to give a pretty broad overview of different ideas today with regards to ransomware mitigation. Here's the formal agenda that we're going to be looking at in today's webinar. And the reason why we want you to engage with us on the live chat is because you may have specific areas of concern with dealing with ransomware, and you can use this webinar as an opportunity to get in touch with some experts from Manage Engine and get your concerns resolved. Right. So here's what we're going to be looking at in today's session. We'll start off by looking at the history and the evolution of ransomware, right? And then we look at seeing how the attack actually takes place, right? Especially today's ransomware, how exactly it gets launched and what exactly it does. We'll then look at preventive measures. We'll look at best practices that we can implement in order to prevent ransomware, or rather at least reduce the chance of being hit by an attack. And then we'll also simultaneously look at technologies that you can use to implement some of these best practices and security measures for mitigating ransomware. Right? And finally, we'll look at the importance of having real-time detection and response mechanisms, and we look at how you can achieve that using a security monitoring solution, right? And we'll also have a quick final look at the end at Manage Engine DataSecurity Plus, which is Manage Engine's data visibility and security solution. And we'll have a look at how we can actually set up alerts using Manage Engine DataSecurity Plus in order to detect and shut down ransomware, right? So this is the broad agenda that we're going to be covering in today's webinar. And like I said, over the course of the webinar, do engage with us on the live chat, ask your questions at different points, get your questions clarified, and in case that if time permits, we can even do a live Q&A at the end of the session, right? So we'll see how the webinar goes, and depending on the questions, we can do a live Q&A as well at the end, right? So let's get started with the actual material of the webinar. Right, so I just wanted to show you a few interesting stats about ransomware before we get started. And the first one is really something that immediately looks very scary, because this says a business is hit with ransomware every 40 seconds. Right, so by the end of this webinar, several businesses across the world are going to be affected with ransomware, and hopefully not any of us. Right, so this was a Kaspersky report, and this really talks about the magnitude of the problem today. Right, so if ransomware isn't something that is a may happen or a chance thing, and ransomware is something that is a very legitimate problem for IT security professionals across the globe, right? And the ransom demand itself has increased progressively over the last few years, because a couple of years back, the trend was that Hi, sorry about that. I think we just had a bit of a network issue. We've just been having a few problems with the audio because of that. I think most of you lost audio connection for a few seconds. Really sorry about that. So we just rewind a bit for a rewind 30 seconds a little bit. My sincere apologies for this. We've been having a few network issues in the office today due to some maintenance going on. But hopefully it should be fine now. I've reconnected to the internet, and hopefully we should have a disturbance-free webinar for the rest of the session, right? So we were looking at this, the first tab, which talked about a business being hit with ransomware every 40 seconds, which is just really drill home the fact that it's a very legitimate problem out there, and it's something that is a lot larger than some of us actually think, right? And because ransomware has become so uh, and because ransomware has become so abundant today, the ransom demand has also correspondingly increased, right? Because a couple of years ago, we used to see ransomware usually demanding, say, $200 or $300 or $400 in Bitcoin. But today, the average ransom demand has risen to $1,077, right? So hackers know that this is something that data is something that we all care about. And because of that, they are willing to increase the ransom demand, knowing fully well that a lot of businesses out there are willing to pay the ransom amount if they get encrypted, right? And the next fact is pretty important when it comes to our approach to ransomware mitigation, right? Because it says 1 in 5 businesses that paid the ransom never got their files back, right? So there's no guarantee that just because you pay ransom, you're going to actually retrieve your data. And this is something that attackers who launch ransomware attacks, what they do is they give you a free decryption for a few files, and that leads you to believe that, oh, this decryption thing actually works, and then you end up paying the ransom for decrypting the rest of your files. But a lot of the times that doesn't happen, right? So in fact, another thing that we've seen, and we actually saw this with some of our own clients that we've worked with, which was that they said they've been hit by ransomware twice or thrice, right? Because once a hacker knows that you're willing to pay the ransom amount, chances are they're going to encrypt your files yet again, right? Because they know you clearly value this piece of data and they know that you're willing to pay. So even after decryption, a few weeks later, you're hit with ransomware again, right? So this is an important thing to remember because keep your ransomware mitigation plan as something that does not involve paying the hackers at any point, right? Because what it's doing today is that it's creating this market of ransomware as a service, right? So some of you might have come across this term RAAS, or ransomware as a service, which essentially is a ransomware service available for any attacker wanting to carry out a large scale attack, right? So especially if they don't have the technical know-hows and the technical knowledge to launch an attack, but they only have malicious intent, they can actually purchase these ransomware starter kits and launch large scale attacks really without much effort, right? And the final fact is to really, again, talk about why we need to be concerned about ransomware, because it says 72% of the victims lost data for 2 days or more. So it's not just the point of losing money and ransom and potential fines for compliance violations, but it's also that you will have an affected business productivity in case you get hit by ransomware, right? Because you lose the data for a few days and that hits the productivity hard, right? So these were just a few stats to get things started. I don't think I need to spend more time talking about why ransomware is a concern, because just the fact that all of you have shown up for the webinar, and we've got a really good response today, and a lot of you have already started asking a few questions to Ram, Ganesh, and Bruce. So I'm sure you all know why ransomware is a huge problem today, and obviously you're concerned about it. But I always like showing a few stats to start things off, because most of us, let's be honest, we love numbers, right? So so let's start off by looking at the evolution of ransomware, right? And the whole thing started way back in 1989, right? So I don't know how many of you guys were still working in IT back then. 30 years ago was when ransomware got started. And back then it was a bit of a failure, right? In the sense that no one really was concerned about ransomware as a potential security risk. Because back then, ransomware was really at a very, very primitive stage. And it had very basic encryption techniques, right? Meaning, even if it encrypted files, it wasn't very hard to decrypt even without paying, right? And also back then, you have to remember that networks weren't connected the way they are today, right? So it wasn't ransomware wasn't really able to propagate across a network, across the globe like it can today, right? So it was also much harder for attackers to launch a large-scale attack because networks and computers obviously aren't connected like they are today because of the internet. And back then, they really couldn't target systems across the globe. Right? So it wasn't a problem. But however, in the 2000s, with the dot-com bubble and with worldwide internet access, that was when ransomware started to pick up, right? Because ransomware became more powerful because it could target more systems across the globe and inevitably end up hitting something of value, right? So the internet essentially gave access to attackers to launch large-scale attacks and target more systems. Now, what happened in 2010 with Bitcoin coming out was that it gave anonymity in payment for the hackers, right? So they could carry out attacks, and they learned that it was easily profitable. It was very profitable for them because not only were they able to carry out and target target a lot of systems in their attack, but also because of Bitcoin payment, no one could trace where the money was going, right? So they wouldn't get caught. So increasingly in the 2010s, ransomware started to become highly profitable and lucrative for hackers. And that's why they started using ransomware as their preferred choice of attack. And as a result of that, last year in 2017, we had so many different strains of ransomware. In fact, I forget the exact number, but I think the number of ransomware strains increased like 4.5x last year, and we had so many advanced strains of WannaCry, Petya, Locky, and good old Zepto, and all of these things were causing problems last year in 2017, right? And what has happened is that these ransomware strains have become pretty advanced, not just in their encryption techniques, but also their worm component, right? Ransomware essentially has this dual nature. It's part malware and part worm. The malware, of course, does the encryption part, which itself has become really strong today, meaning it's very hard to decrypt data once encrypted. And the worm component of ransomware is what makes it spread across a corporate network and end up infecting every file and folder and share in the network, right? So the worm component is something that has developed a lot today, and in fact last year when if some of you remember Petya, Petya could actually, once it infects a computer, it could actually figure out the list of all the IP addresses in your network that it can spread to, and it uses various different techniques like accessing Windows Credential Manager in order to obtain those credentials, right? And that's absolutely horrifying because that's the biggest problem with ransomware today, that it can spread really fast across a network and potentially end up infecting all your files and folders and shares, right? So the worm component, that is something that has advanced today. And like I said, all of this has resulted in an industry for ransomware as a service. So just like software as a service, which is what companies like Manage Engine's parent company Zoho Corporation does, and just like software as a service, you now have ransomware as a service, which essentially is like giving hackers ransomware starter kits in order to carry out attacks. Right? So it's very important here again to remember not to pay the attackers if you're hit by ransomware, because that only encourages them to carry out more attacks. It sort of feeds into this ransomware as a service industry, right? When they know that people are paying money to decrypt their data, the ransomware as a service industry starts to thrive, right? So, and this is just to sum up why ransomware is so effective today, right? Because attackers can target so many machines the number of potential victims is really high. And because we all care about data and compliance regulations, there's a very high chance of a ransom payout, low risk of getting caught because of Bitcoin, and really a very low effort to carry out an attack because of ransomware starter kits being available due to the growth of the ransomware as a service industry. And all of these reasons have made ransomware so effective today that in the IT security solutions market, ransomware mitigation solutions has become a subcategory of the market, right? So just like you have antivirus tools, you have SIM solutions, you have GRC tools and things like that, ransomware defense tools itself has become a category in the IT security solutions market, right? So that's how big a problem it is. In fact, last year, the estimates were that ransomware cost more than $5 billion in losses for companies, right? Because that's huge, $5 billion in losses. So this is really something that is easily become one of the biggest problems for any IT security professional today. And it goes and the trend is showing that the problem is only going to worsen over these next few months and years. And we all need to definitely give dedicated attention towards just mitigating ransomware in our organizations. Right? So let's look at now the attack pattern, right? Exactly how the attack takes place. So typically, just as most cyber attacks do, ransomware starts off with phishing, right? The good old send attachments, send mails to our employees of an organization. An unsuspecting employee clicks on an attachment thinking that it's legit. And what happens is that it usually doesn't display the content immediately. It says you need to run a macros in order to do it. The unsuspecting employee ends up clicking it, and that initiates the encryption, right? So, and it's pretty scary that attacks can start this way, because even if in an organization of 100 people or 500 people, even if one employee makes the mistake of falling for the phishing attack, that is in itself enough to launch the attack in the network. And because of the advanced worm components and all these different techniques to spread across the network, even the innocent, even the people who were careful who were careful and didn't fall for the phishing attacks, they themselves might end up getting affected because of the one user who wasn't careful, right? So this is an area that you might want to focus on when it comes to defense as well, right? So email security and things like that. So we'll get to that in a bit. But I also wanted to talk about the fact that phishing, we all think that that's the only way it starts, but ransomware is so advanced today that it does not even depend. It does not even depend on phishing or a user having to click and execute a macros for it to actually start. And in fact, a good example for this is the WannaCry outbreak that we had last year. Because in that case, what happened was attackers actually exploited the Microsoft vulnerability, right, in the SMB, the server message block. And what they could do because of that was that they could gain remote access to a machine and execute ransomware directly, right? So they're not even depending on phishing for a user to actually download and execute an attachment in order to get into the network. They're actually able to exploit vulnerabilities and directly execute the ransomware on the target machine, right? And again, you have, it's not just the SMB vulnerabilities that they use. If you have a server and the username and password is weak and gets compromised, then again the attacker can remote desktop in and perform any action that they wish, right? So what they would do in that case is that they would compromise your server's credentials, and then they would disable security features and then download ransomware directly, right? So these attacks, in fact, the SMB and the RDP techniques are pretty similar, right? Because attackers, what they try to do is they try to scan the entire internet and look for open ports. And there are tools to do this, tools that can do this in minutes, right? So they're able to scan the internet and find out open ports that they can attack, right? 445 for SMB and port 3389 for RDP, right? So if you have open ports, an open exposed port, an RDP port, the attackers will try to use different techniques like brute force in order to guess your password. And if it's weak, they'll end up cracking it, and then they have access to actually go ahead and compromise the security policies and execute ransomware on the server. Right. So this is just to say that phishing is not the only way in which ransomware can start. In fact, a lot of ransomware today, and this is pretty scary, is that it can just get installed in the background, right, without a user's knowledge. They could have just visited a compromised site without their knowledge, and that is enough. That is sufficient for ransomware to download onto a system, and it doesn't even require a user to explicitly click any file for it to start to execute, right? So it just, once the malware gets onto the system, it just automatically launches, and the attack begins in the background, right? So a lot of these ways in which the attack can actually start off and launch in a network. And once it launches, it's just going to encrypt data really quickly. It's going to start encrypting whatever it can get its hands on, and then demand the ransom, right? And when it demands a ransom, it usually gives you an amount, and then says it usually gives you the free decryption for a few files to trick you into believing that decryption is a guarantee. And then if you don't pay it within a small amount of time, it then doubles the ransom and then gives you a final deadline before, after which it just wipes out the data entirely, right? So, and obviously you don't want to go there, right? So, and after ransom, of course, it tries to spread across the network, right? So once it's finished its job on a machine, the worm component comes into the picture, and it tries to spread across your network, trying to infect all your files and folders, right? So this is typically how the attack takes place. Now, how to approach the problem, right? And we recommend 3 important areas that you want to focus on, right? So you know by now a rough idea of how the attack works. So you probably are thinking about different parts, different moments in the attack pattern where you can add some security measures and policies, right? And that effectively boils down to 3 major areas. The first is that you want to focus on reducing the chance of being hit by an attack, right? So implement certain security measures and best practices and policies so that you reduce the chance of being hit by an attack, almost eliminate the chance of an attack taking place in your organization, right? Make it almost zero, the chance of being hit by ransomware. However, that alone is not going to be enough, which is why you need to focus on incident detection and response as well, right? In addition to reducing the chance of being hit by an attack, which is of course very important, you also need to make sure that you're in a position, in case an attack gets launched in your environment, in case a ransomware infection gets initiated, you should have some kind of technology, some monitoring set up in your environment to instantly detect that suspicious activity in your network, right? So, and then of course, after this, you prepare for the worst. In case you're not able to detect and respond to the incident in time for whatever reason, you still need to be in a position to mitigate the attack by say restoring your data using a backup, right? So you need to prepare for the worst case scenario. If step 1 and 2 fails, if you're not able to eliminate the attack from even entering your network, you're not able to detect the attack when it launches, you still have to prepare for the worst and ensure that you have a secure backup to get your data back, right? So this is broadly speaking what we have to do, right? More specifically, here are some best practices that you can implement, right? And some of them are free, so you can't give excuses that budget was the reason that you couldn't implement these. So these are best practices, age-old IT best practices that you want to implement in your organization, irrespective of how big or small you are, right? Starting with user education, because an educated user makes it so much more harder for a criminal to carry out an attack, right? So phishing, of course, is still one of the major ways ransomware and other cyber attacks spread. So having educated users makes it who are always suspecting of these kinds of phishing emails and things like that. That makes it much harder for ransomware to first get into your environment. You have to do patching. Again, a lot of the times people know this thing. They know they should be running the latest software, but they don't. And a classic example of the dire consequences of this was again illustrated by WannaCry last year, because it actually used the Eternal Blue exploit to proliferate across the globe. And just a month or two before the outbreak happened in May, Microsoft actually released a patch to fix the problem, right? So they literally said, hey, there's a problem here that could result in some damage. We've released a patch, so go ahead and patch your machine and be secure. And despite that, hundreds of thousands of machines across the globe were unpatched, and that resulted in WannaCry becoming quite a big attack, taking down large organizations like the NHS in the UK. Right? So patching, a must-do, no excuses for not running the latest software. Right? And then you've got endpoint security solutions. And this has again become a popular way of combating ransomware, a popular preventive mechanism especially, right? Having next-gen antivirus and other tools like antivirus to focus on your endpoints and ensure that your endpoints are secure, right? So this is something that you can focus on, especially if you're looking to really strengthen security at the endpoints, right? And then enforce least privilege, another age-old IT best practice, right? You want to provide the least amount of privilege possible in your organization. Unfortunately, organizations often provide way more access rights to their employees than is needed, right? And why do administrators do that? Because it's convenient, right? So things don't have to slow down when users require extra permissions to do some during the course of their work. However, do not do this, because this is an automatic increase to the potential attack surface for any ransomware attack, right? So you don't want ransomware hitting a machine that has privileged access. So instead, what you need to do is use robust access management techniques to restrict unwarranted access and reduce the number of access points through which the ransomware or malware can enter and spread through your organization, right? So enforce least privilege or just-in-time privilege techniques so that privileges are not handed over across your network for fun, and it's very specific and very restricted, right? So that's very important. Managing file permissions, again related to the privileges, right? Managing file permissions becomes very important, because if a user account is trying to encrypt files on your file server, and that user account does not have right privileges, then the attack ends right there. So you have to make sure that you're staying on top of your NTFS file permissions in the case of your Windows servers, and ensure that really no one has unnecessary write permissions when it comes to your critical file servers that are storing sensitive data, right? So if you're ensuring that your NTFS file permissions are properly managed, that means that if compromised accounts are trying to run ransomware on the file server, they will not succeed because they don't have the required permissions, right, to write or encrypt. So that's again important. You can, again, for managing file permissions, there are solutions available out there that can help you stay on top of your file permissions and changes happening to the file permissions, right? So, and then there's whitelisting. Another thing is whitelisting. Strictly monitor the downloads and use of third-party software, right? So you want to add an acceptable software to your whitelist, which will help you block unauthorized programs from running, right? So if a program containing malware isn't whitelisted, it just can't be downloaded into your network in the first place. So this is very important. It's just like whitelisting, blacklisting. Blacklist, block known malicious IP addresses, right? You can leverage next-gen firewalls, threat intelligence tools, and things like that, so that you can block malicious sources at the network perimeter level itself. And in addition to all of this, See if you can regularly review security events by scheduling and running reports, right? So you can leverage here monitoring tools which can do that for you, which can actually help you review how all your other security systems are performing, how your network really, all the security events that are happening in your network. It can give you details about if everything is running as it should be. So this is a good practice to add to all of these other preventive practices, right? And you might be thinking, okay, ransomware is something that launches immediately, and there's no point in reviewing the activity at the end of the next day. But really, this reviewing security events should be an important part of your security operations, because it really helps not just for ransomware, but to also flag a lot of different anomalies that could potentially lead to attacks such as ransomware, right? So these are best practices that you want to implement. And in fact, one of our attendees has just mentioned a couple of minutes back that we've missed a key best practice of backup, right? And we actually didn't miss it. I just wanted to give it as a separate slide, because I would say that this is the best practice and the only sure shot way of recovering from a ransomware infection, right? This is the only sure shot way. No other security solution, no cutting edge tool can guarantee ransomware mitigation, but the only guaranteed sure shot way of recovering from an attack is if you have a secure, reliable backup, right? So that's the only way you can actually recover from a ransomware infection. So bottom line is, this is something that we all know. This is something that every IT person knows, that you need to have backup of your critical data. And despite that, most of us don't do it, right? So most of us don't do backup, even though we know that that's the only sure shot way of recovering from a ransomware infection. So here is where it's very important to add something like a backup solution, an incremental backup solution to your security arsenal, so that you are in a position, come worst case scenario, you're still in a position to recover from the attack, right? You can use malware removal tools and all of those things. But finally, if you want to get up and running, you need to implement the best practice, which is back up your data. It's as simple as that. Back up your data, and you are really, that's the only sure shot way. And I cannot stress upon this enough. That is the only sure shot way of recovering from a ransomware infection, right? So let's look at some technologies that we can leverage to implement some of these best practices, right? So here's where it starts with technologies that before we actually have one more question that I'd like to answer here. So Shelly wants to know, what if ransomware gets laid down a month before it starts encrypting? Do backups still help? Right? So that's where incremental backup comes into the picture, right? So if ransomware, say, infects my critical file server today, but I have an incremental backup solution that keeps taking backups at regular intervals and tracking every change that is happening, you would still be in a position to reload the right piece of data, even if you get encrypted, right? So even if you get encrypted, and even if one of your own backup copies isn't legit, you still have incremental backup to ensure that you have secure copies of data as well. Right? So the backup has to be something that happens routinely. It's not that you take a backup and then you stop. Right? There are solutions which can actually do this kind of incremental backup, so that backups are scheduled and periodically taken at a regular interval. Right? So even in the case which you've asked, where you're looking at if backup would still help if a ransomware has already been laid down a month ago, well, if you've had incremental backup all along, it would still help, right? So back up your data is something that I could just spend an entire session just talking on the importance. We all know it, but we still don't do it efficiently enough. and that's something that we should look at changing going forward. Right, so these are, in a sense, on this slide we've got a whole bunch of technologies that you can leverage to implement some of these ransomware security measures that we looked at, right? So you've got patch management tools, and typically they allow you to efficiently, in a streamlined way, deploy patches, right, to ensure that the latest released patches from different vendors can be pushed onto your systems in quick time. So this ensures that any exploits which have become known to the world, any patches that are available get pushed onto your systems immediately. Right? So you can leverage patch management tools. They can be handy. Endpoint security solutions. We discussed that. Antivirus, next-gen antivirus, and things like that. Backup solutions, right? Backup, again, the only way to sure shot way of recovering from a ransomware infection. Right? And then you've got monitoring tools. Like I said, important for reviewing security events, important for running reports and flagging anomalies, yes. But not only that, and we're going to look at this in a few minutes, monitoring technology can actually help you instantly detect ransomware activity in your environment, right? So by constantly monitoring the different events happening in your network, you can actually instantly detect a ransomware infection in your organization, right? So monitoring tools can come in handy there. And then email security, right? So just like how phishing is a major issue, major way by which ransomware starts. So obviously you can focus on email security and implement content filtering and things like that, which can actually go a long way in thwarting phishing attempts in your organization, right? And then threat intelligence. You can leverage threat feeds to block known malicious sources, which itself ticks a lot of checkboxes in the defense, right? So if you know 100,000 or 600,000 blacklisted IP addresses across the globe, blocking them without second thought at the network perimeter level can go a long way in eliminating a lot of bad guys, right? So you can use open source threat feeds in case you have budget constraints, or if you don't, you can very well purchase threat feeds from several different vendors. You can leverage next-gen firewalls, which can be integrated with threat feeds and things like that, right? So this is basically an idea to give you an idea on different kinds of technologies that you can evaluate and see what kinds of things can actually add value to your security program, right? But typically, these are what people look at. These are what people look at when it comes to mitigating ransomware infections, right? So now let's have a look at incident detection and response, right? So we've been saying that this is something we want to have set up in our environment. We want to have this kind of monitoring set up in our environment where we're tracking different kinds of activities, right? Things like file modifications, writes, renames, encryptions, right? We want to track activities happening to our data in our organization, right? Because why this is important is that not only does this help you generate the different reports needed for compliance and the different reports needed for periodically reviewing and auditing activity, but what this does is that it can help you detect instantly if there's any suspicious behavior, right? So imagine if several file modifications happened within a short time frame. This could indicate potential ransomware activity, right? And you can actually set up alerts to detect these kinds of suspicious activities, right? Like several, say 100 file modifications happened within a minute, right? So you can actually set up alerts using security monitoring tools so that you can quickly detect such incidents, right? And you can also go one step further and automate the threat response by shutting down the machine that gets infected, right? So when your security monitoring tool actually detects ransomware, you can attach a script to the tool so that it executes a shutdown script to shut down the machine that's been infected with ransomware, right? So that's a pretty neat way of detecting and mitigating the attack. You're continuously tracking all of these different activities like modifications and writes and renames. And when several of these events happen within a short period of time, your tool is going to be able to give you that alert that suspicious ransomware like activity is taking place in your network. And what the tool can also do is that it can go ahead and take action and shut down the system, right? So by the time you receive the alert and you come to check, that machine has already been shut down for you, right? So this is what security monitoring technology can help you achieve. You can actually detect a ransomware infection in real time and also automate the threat response, right? So this is a very neat solution, because in addition to having those preventive measures in place, what incident detection and response means is that in case you do get infected, in case ransomware is able to bypass your basic security measures and policies, you are still able to track and shut down ransomware in your environment, right? So let's have a look at how you can actually do this, right? So this slide just sort of sums up what we discussed, right? You're able to do real-time monitoring, so you're able to detect ransomware as soon as it gets launched in your environment, and your tool, a security monitoring tool, can be configured to shut down the infected system and give you the alert, so you can then go ahead and quarantine the machine, and you can then recover from the attack, right? So you can essentially take the machine off the network, you can shut down the machine, and you can and then recover from the attack. Use malware removal tools and use your backup solution that you've got to restore data availability, right? So this essentially is what the process would entail. You detect the attack, the attack is shut down with your because you've configured your security monitoring tool, and then you can go ahead and take the machine off the network, quarantine it, and then recover from the attack, right? Recover in the sense that you can restore the data availability because of the backup that you've taken, right? So this is how what we want to do, and I'm going to show you how we can set up these alerts using Data Security Plus, right? So I'm going to show you how you can set up two different alerts for ransomware using the tool. The first alert is to set up an alert for several file modifications happening within a short period of time, right? Say 100 file modifications happening within 1 minute. I'm going to show you how you can set up an alert for that. I'm also going to show you how you can set up a more specific alert as opposed to the generic one. You can set up a more specific alert to track known ransomware encryption formats, right? So you know things like Locky and Zepto and .w and CRY for WannaCry. So you can actually monitor the creation of these files in your network, right? So if any of those files gets generated in your network, you know for sure that ransomware is being launched. So you can set up these two alerts, and upon the triggering of the alerts, you can attach a shutdown.bat file script so that the machine gets shut down when the alert gets triggered, right? And these two alerts you can set up using any other tool that you may be using, right? I'm not saying use you can do this only with Manage Engine Data Security Plus, right? So if you're using a tool that can give you this functionality, go ahead and configure these. But if you're new to this and you're looking at getting a solution, I would say that go ahead and download Data Security Plus and try setting these alerts up in your environment for yourself, right? So I want you to do this with me. You can actually go to manageengine.com/data security, right? The URL that you see on the screen, that will take you to Data Security Plus's official website. And in case you've not downloaded the 30-day free trial, you can do that. And that's just going to take you like 5 minutes to get set up, right? So you can do that. If you've not done that, you can do that at the end of the webinar. But instead, you can also access the online demo that we've got for you, right? So you can just see demo, and I'm doing all these steps so that no one feels lazy and thinks we'll do it later. So I encourage all of you to jump to the website, and you can configure the alert with me in real time, because it's that easy, right? So jump to the demo section. You have the option of requesting for a personalized demo here if you wish, in case you want to evaluate Data Security Plus with our pre-sales consultants. You can schedule a web-based demo right here. But okay, we don't have time for that now. Jump to the online demo, demo.datasecurityplus.com, and log in as an administrator. right? We've got a few more questions that have been coming, so just bear with me for another 4 or 5 minutes before by which time we'll finish the webinar, and then we'll answer your questions on the live chat in just a few minutes, right? So jump to demo.datasecurityplus.com. Might be a tad bit slow because a lot of us are logging in to the machine. just bear with us for a few seconds. Demo.datasecurity plus. Log in as an administrator and jump to the alert section of the product. Right, you see the alerts tab on the top. Jump to the alert section, and once you're here into the alert section, click on New Alert Profile. Right, so I'm just going to walk you through some the fields that's there in the alert configuration, and you can look at and figure out exactly how this would work in your environment. Right, so you typically start off creating alert profiles by giving a name. So I'm just going to call this ransomware detection. Right, an alert description. You can just say ransomware, possible ransomware. I would say I would never give guarantees. So possible ransomware activity detected. Right, set a severity for the alert. It's obviously going to be a critical alert. And here's where you actually choose the event for which you want the alert for. Right, so let's first look at the specific alert that we saw. We want an alert for when known ransomware encryption formats get created in our environment. Right, so what you can do here is, if you scroll down, you can see the section called file type under criteria. And here you can actually choose ransomware encrypted files that we've actually built into the product, right? So any of these file formats, if they get generated in your environment, the product can raise the alert for that event, right? So you can just choose. You can see log key, you can see HackU, Crypt, CryptoLocker, Zepto, and all of these things. If any of these files get created in your network, you can get an alert notification, right? So you can get an alert notification for this. What you can also do is you can go ahead and add new file types, right? So if you know that there's a new ransomware strain that's being created today called .say ZAQ, if you know that this is the encryption format for the file, you can go ahead and add this new file type, and the product will start monitoring the occurrence of that new ransomware strain as well in your environment, and give you the alerts if those encrypted files get created, right? And what you can then do is set your mode of notification. You can set up a mail notification right here, and but more important than the mail notification, here is where you can actually append an action to the alert, so that when the alert gets triggered, an action gets executed, right? So here's where you can actually, if you've downloaded the product, you can point to the shutdown.bat file, which is available in the products installation folder, which means that when this ransomware alert gets triggered, the machine where the infected machine is shut down in real time, right? So this is something that you can actually implement in just a matter of a few clicks in your environment, right? So you already got one alert right here, an alert for when any known ransomware encryption format gets created. You can attach the shutdown.bat file script and shut down the machine that has been infected, right? So this is alert number one. Alert number two is for several file modifications happening within a short period of time, right? So here is where you can go ahead and choose the action here as file modifications, creations, and renames, right? So this is typically what ransomware does. So when any of these happen, you can be alerted. What you also need to do is configure the threshold limit for this, right? So for the renames and modifications and create events, you can set up a threshold by clicking this checkbox. So you can say 100 events in 1 minute by same process, right? So this is to say that the same process is doing 100 or more modifications to your file, then this alert gets triggered, right? And as usual, you can go ahead and append the action as well to the alert. So when the renames and modifies and creates happen, when 100 of these happen within 1 minute by the same process, you can append the shutdown.batch file script and automate threat response, right? Automatically shut down the machine that has been infected, right? So this is two really crucial alerts that you want when it comes to ransomware detection and response. And you can actually set these up using DataSecurity Plus in just a matter of clicks. Right, so I'm just going to jump back to the webinar. We're pretty much done with the actual presentation bit. I don't want to jump in and give you a sales pitch for DataSecurity Plus because that defeats the objective of the session. The objective of the session was to give you some insights into ransomware's history and evolution, talk about how the attack takes place, different security best practices that you can implement, and what kinds of technologies you can evaluate for this, and then also get some insights on how you can achieve real-time ransomware detection and response in your environment. Right, so I hope that this webinar session was useful. We still have a lot of unanswered questions which we're going to be answering over the next few minutes. So in case you have any more questions, do keep them coming. In case you have any unanswered questions, just bear with us for a few minutes and we'll have them answered immediately. Apart from that, I really sincerely hope that this webinar was useful and gave you some insights that you are looking for. I'd be really happy to know that even some small information that you learned from this webinar would end up being useful for your security program. Right? So thank you so much for taking time off from your busy schedules and joining us for today's session. Do take a moment at the end of the webinar to fill up your feedback form, just 10 to 20 seconds to let us know what you liked or didn't like about the session, and also what suggestions you have for future webinars from Manage Engine. Right? So once again, thank you so much for joining us and have a great day ahead.